To examine whether or not a person chooses to vote will require a willing participation in gathering data. The unit of analysis would be a sample group of voters and non-voters, specifically American citizens with as many different racial identities being represented, a quoted sample. Some data can be obtained from previous voting records. However, this information will only be useful for people who have chosen to vote. Therefore, a survey of specific racially identified people will be necessary, since the overall goal is to represent as many races and social groups as possible and why they have chosen to vote or not to vote. Surveys can be done in person, so the additional questions can be asked. Questions in the survey would start simple and then would be followed up by questions according to their previous answers. The surveys would not require a person to identify themselves by name. This would stop sensitivity of issues and backlash from groups for participating in the survey. Questions that would be asked would include, but are not limited to, what race do you socially identify with? Did your identified race have influence on deciding your vote or not to vote? Did your racial identification affect the way you chose to vote? Have you voted in the last 2 previous presidential elections? What made you to decide to vote or choose not to vote? Did any social group you are associated with influence your voting decisions? Were you asked by your social group to vote? What social groups do you associate with? The last question of social groups can then be explored for the size of the social groups that they associate with. This would include unions, churches, and racially identified groups.